Hey guys, I'm supposedly live here. First time I've done this, so pardon me. Alright, I'll just give it a few minutes here. Hi, Amos. Alright, so is my sound working okay? Can you guys hear me? Can someone, if you can hear me, just let me know. Alright, well, I'm just going to take about 30 minutes tonight and do just sort of a live Q&A. First time I've ever done this, first time I've ever used Facebook Live, so there's not much to it, I guess, except for just talking. So some of you had sent some, or you had commented with some questions earlier on in the day, so I'm just going to go ahead and take a look at some of those and just kind of do my best to just kind of give you an off-the-cuff answer to some of them. So, hi, by the way. Hope you guys are all having a good night. Hope you're enjoying a nice view of my little Batman shrine I have in my office down here. Made sure the camera was positioned so that you could get an eyeful of that. Alright, so let me just grab a random question here, and we'll just go for it. Alright, so Benjamin asks, how do you use cataphatic or positive language when communicating about God without it becoming static and idolatrous? Cataphatic meaning obviously positive language, apophatic meaning negative language. So apophatic theology is basically where you talk about who God is not and what God is not. So he's asking, how do you use positive language about God without it becoming static and idolatrous? And that's a very good question. I guess when we're talking Christian theology, which is what I do, you are kind of beginning, you're starting, you're entering into the conversation with the presupposition that God has revealed himself in Jesus. So I think using cataphatic language to describe God as a Christian simply begins there with Christ. There's nothing wrong with the Christian beginning on the foundation of God is like Jesus. So from there you can discuss, you know, what the nature of God is, what the nature of God is not, as far as what God is. But for the Christian, we're starting on the foundation that God is like Jesus. So I think you just have to presuppose that, and it might be problematic for some people, but it is, it's just where we start. And if we don't start there, we're not really doing Christian theology. And if we're not doing that, that's absolutely fine. But for the one who is attempting to do Christian theology, you start on the premise that God is like Jesus, and then you work from there. Now, I think I know what you're, a little bit more what you're getting at, and I'll have to save that for another time. But, oh, and there's a second part to his question here as well. Okay, there's a few things in there, but I'll just skip to the last part. He says, practically, what does it mean to walk in the faith of Christ crucified and exist outside the systems of meaning, power, signs, etc. in this world? That's a loaded question, and we could talk about that all night. I'll just focus in on one of the things you brought up. What does it mean practically to walk in the faith of Christ crucified and exist outside the systems of meaning? I'll just start right there. I'll start on the first one with, what does it mean to walk in the faith of Christ crucified outside systems of meaning? I'm not sure exactly if what I'm going to say is going to speak to what you're asking, but I came to the conclusion a long time ago that I need to walk and I need to live as though life is not inherently meaningful. Now, I do believe life is inherently meaningful, but I think I have to live as though it isn't. And that's because if I live as though everything is inherently meaningful, and if I live as though everything I do means something, then everything essentially becomes meaningless, at least in my understanding of things. So like, your grandfather never tells you a story about, how he went to the grocery store one day and he left with an armful of groceries. But he might tell you a story about how he went to the grocery store one day and he ran into a woman down the cereal aisle and they bumped into one another and dropped their baskets and ended up bumping heads and getting into some awkward conversation and ended up, exchanging numbers, and then that's your grandma. That might be a story your grandpa tells you. Why? Because he went to a place where you're only supposed to get groceries and he left with something quite different. But you don't tell a story about going to a grocery store and leaving with groceries, because that's not a meaningful story. You just left with the thing you went in expecting to get. And if you approach life from the angle that everything is inherently meaningful, then when you find meaning in life, well, that's rather meaningless. Good job. If you believe that life is inherently meaningful and meaning is everywhere, then when you find it, it really isn't a virtue. But if you approach the world as though, nothing really has any inherent meaning. Now, you can actually believe that, but I think to live and approach life as though that's not true is how we actually live a meaningful life. Because if I can extract meaning from something that I don't believe has any inherent meaning, then that's actually meaningful. So let me say this another way. I don't know. I don't want to get hung up on that for too long, but I think life should be approached. Well, consider the cross. I mean, the Bible says that that God made the one who knew no sin was made to be sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And how that, maybe a better translation of that is that the one who was perfect and sinless was treated by us as though he were a sinner, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And so the point there is that this perfect one, who did everything right, never did anything wrong, perfectly followed the will of God in everything, that he ends up being crucified by us and murdered by us. And so all the good that he did was, for all suits and purposes, meaningless. It didn't amount to anything, right? But the fact that he still did it, in spite of the fact that he knew how it was going to end, is what makes it meaningful. So I think approaching the world as though there is no inherent meaning, even if you believe that there is the best way to approach life and is the best way to approach the world, because when you can mine meaning out of that, meaning actually becomes something meaningful. Another way to think about this, well, I'll just say this. My philosophy on living, and I don't really think in terms of afterlife. Obviously, if you follow my stuff at all, you know that I don't really buy into the concept of hell. As an Orthodox Christian, I do believe in the resurrection and all that kind of stuff, but still the way that I live my life practically day to day isn't in light of any afterlife theory. That kind of doesn't even enter into my mind. I kind of use the Nietzschean philosophy of eternal recurrence as a way as a philosophy for living. Nietzsche, I think it's in, I want to say it's in The Gay Science, and I don't have it in front of me, so pardon me for butchering the quote, but he basically says, suppose a demon comes to you one night, and I posted about this the other day if you want the actual quote. He said, suppose a demon comes to you one night and says, this life that you're living right now, you will have to live over and over and over again throughout the ages. Every moment of it, pleasant and unpleasant, you will have to live over and over and over again. Every joy, every sorrow, you'll have to live this forever. He said, if you heard that, would you fall down on your face and wail? Or have you lived in such a way that you would go through all the pain and all the hell to get to certain moments again? And if you can't say that you live through the life that you've already lived in order to get to certain moments, you're probably not living right. And so that's the way I try to live. I don't live in light of a heaven or in light of a hell. I live as though I'm going to have to do this thing over and over and over again forever and ever and ever. And I try to make each moment one that I would live the rest of my life that I've already lived again in order to get to this moment. And I think that's great way to live. So anyways, we'll move on from there. Looking for some more questions. Let's see. Well, I'll just tackle this. People have been asking about hell a lot. I've got a couple requests for that. So I'm not going to launch into a big deconstruction of the concept of hell to really get into any, scriptural ideas even really about that. That would be for another longer discussion. But what I will say is simply this. For me personally, I began to, as a pastor and as a Christian, and as one who has been a Christian for something like 20 years, I began to have serious doubts and serious questions about the issue of hell, not because, as many often suggest, that I was trying to justify some sinful behavior, and I didn't want to face the threat of hell, and so I sought to do away with it. It wasn't because I was, nothing like that. It wasn't because I was afraid to preach on it. I preached hell like nobody's business, man. I preached hellfire that would make Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God look like a Mother's Day message from the love child of Oprah and Joel Osteen. I mean, I've laid it on thick and I've laid it on heavy. I had no problems preaching it. I just simply began to study the issue out, and I began to weigh the concept, and I simply couldn't. I found it untenable. I couldn't preach it anymore. And the more that I dug into Scripture, the more that I dug into what Jesus actually said and what he didn't say about hell, the less I was comfortable with preaching it. I remember the old saying, Jesus taught twice as much about hell as he did about heaven, and I became fascinated with finding out whether or not that was true. And well, it's not true. Jesus speaks of Gehenna, and Jesus speaks of Hades, and I actually just discussed this with my 11-year-old son today, that Hades was a literal physical location outside of Jerusalem that you can still visit today. It's where pagan kings of old sacrificed their children to Moloch in fire, and it's also the place that when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem in 586 BCE, that they threw the bodies of the slain. And Jeremiah warns in Jeremiah chapter 7 that if you do not choose the way of peace, but instead opt for the way of war and violence when Babylon comes, if you try to fight back, that valley that you call the Valley of Gehenna that refers to the pagan sacrifices that used to go on there, you're going to have a new name for it. You're going to call it the Valley of Slaughter, because it will forever remind you of what happened when you chose the way of violence over the way of peace. When it came to Babylon, and they chose the way of violence, and many thousands ended up corpses in the Valley of Gehenna. And so when Jesus uses the word Gehenna, it appears that he's playing off of this, off of the way that Jeremiah speaks of Gehenna, and he's using it to describe perhaps the impending destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans in 70 CE, which the Gospels are written more than likely after that event, so they're looking back at that event and figuring it out prophetically, and so they're seeing it in that same light. So when Jesus speaks about Gehenna, I think it's 11 times he uses the word Gehenna, 11 times I believe, and I could be off here, it's been a while since I've taught on this, that he uses the word Hades. If you put these together, even in the Gospels, it comes down to something like 5, 6, 7 times that Jesus actually refers to these ideas. It's not like he's just talking about it all the time. You're talking about 4 Gospels, and you're talking about all these different references, some of them referring to the same event, and we just like to, here's a verse where he says it, here's a verse where he says it, and here's a verse where he says it. Look at Jesus is talking about hell all the time. When you smush them all down and you condense them all down, he's really not talking about it all that much. And also the hell that was believed in Jesus' day is not the hell that you and I have inherited from Dante. The hell that we inherited from Dante, it's a mashup of Greek mythology. There's some bits of the Quran in there as well. It's a mess. It's certainly not scriptural. If you look in the Babylonian Talmud, you can read a little bit about what how Gehenna may have been viewed in the days of Jesus, and it's not the way we view it today. It was like you could do a stint of like 12 months max, and then you could repent and be released. You could repent at the gates of Gehenna and not have to go in. It wasn't this place where, every single person who doesn't pray the sinner's prayer and dies in the church van on the way home from youth group that night, and he resisted the youth pastor's, powerful altar call, is going to end up burning there for eternity. That's bullcrap, and you can't make a case for that using scripture. You just simply can't do it. You can try, but you're making crap up. So the hell of Jesus' day is not the hell of our day. And so when we try to fit our 2,000-year-old crappy doctrines into something, from another time, we're using an anachronism, and we're not doing it properly. If you get my first book, Saints in the Arms of a Happy God, which is available on Amazon right now, I go into a lot of this in more detail. I'm also going to be releasing some mini books on hell in the months to come, and there's that. For some reason, I am not seeing the questions coming up live. Let me see, maybe I just need to refresh the page here. Hope you guys are doing well out there, by the way. All right, hold on, let me see what's going on here. Okay, I just needed to refresh here. Okay, I don't know why I'm not seeing the questions live. It's just not loading here. So let me just try to find some that someone had sent in earlier again to address those. Someone had asked just how, with all the different things, the change of beliefs and the deconstructive process and all that, how that has affected my family life, my relationship with my wife and my children. Well, quite a bit, let me tell you that. Another story for another time, but just the Reader's Digest version. I just take a much less authoritative approach to parenting. I try to learn from my kids as much as I hope they're learning from me. I don't indoctrinate my children. I once had this dream that my children would grow up to be these not grow up, but even in their childhood would be these crazy, charismatic warrior kids. I wanted my kids to be like the kids from the Jesus Camp movie. Times certainly have changed, ladies and gentlemen. But I used to teach my kids what to think. And now I'm just, pardon me, my phone is ringing. All right. I used to teach my children what to think, and now I'm just more concerned with teaching them how to think. I just had a conversation with my son today about hell and what it is and what it is not, and he struggles with the story of Abraham and Isaac and what that's all about. And so we had a good discussion about that today, and I don't tell him, Samuel, this is what it means and this is what it doesn't mean. I just ask him questions like, I don't know, what is that? What do you think about that? Does that sound like it makes any sense? And we talked about hell today, and that comes up a lot too. And he's like, sometimes, Dad, I'm afraid that maybe we follow the wrong religion, and maybe we're going to end up in some other religion's hell. And I said, well, if that's the case, and we are wrong, or even we're wrong about Christianity, and we end up in the Christian God's hell, would you want to spend eternity in heaven with a God who would create such a place? And he said, no, I'd rather be in hell than in heaven with a God who would create such a place. So, I just try to teach my kids to think logically about this kind of stuff, and I don't indoctrinate them. That just doesn't work. And as far as my wife and I are concerned, I used to very much be about being the priest of my household and the man of God and, having the answers. And I just don't do things that way anymore. My wife and I don't agree on everything scripturally and theologically, but not in any way, in a contentious way. It's really, my wife was a pastor's wife for 11 and a half years. At this point in her life, she's just kind of like, it's not really something I really care to talk or think about that much right now. And so, we have interesting conversations about it sometimes late at night, but it's really just not, it's not a thing with us. And honestly, taking that out of the center of my marriage, it's supposed to destroy your marriage, right? It's actually saved my marriage. The way that I lived prior to really having a, just going through a radical deconstructive process was, I was very charismatic, very Pentecostal, word of faith oriented, and I went through, let's give you a little mini sermonette here on this because I'm not seeing questions, so I may as well just go for it. I remember we went through a period in our marriage where I had heard this guy say in Bible college, in my family, we never even say the word divorce. We refer to it as the D word. Because if you even speak that word in the atmosphere of your house, you're going to release a spirit of divorce and curse your marriage, And so I practiced that. And we wouldn't even say the word, and we weren't honest with each other. We weren't upfront with each other. We didn't honestly discuss things when there were disagreements. We just kind of swept them under the rug because you don't want to say the D word, or even go there at all. And, so for years we kind of just were really silent with one another. We weren't upfront, we weren't honest, we weren't real people in each other's presences. And that took a massive, massive toll on our relationship. And, oddly enough, it wasn't until we learned to say the D word that our marriage actually began to be something enjoyable. And our marriage was saved because we shed all that crap, and we stopped just all the religious nonsense and you can't say that and you can't do that. And dude, I was a very well-meaning, controlling husband. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was what I was supposed to do. I thought it was my duty as a man of God, but it really was just controlling and manipulative, and the deconstructive process saved my marriage. So I'll just leave it at that. So it's been very good for it, and the truth of the matter is that religion doesn't play that big of a part in my marriage. My understanding of Jesus, the way that I personally relate to the person of Jesus, of course that plays a big part in my marriage. But as far as between my wife and I, it's really not. It just doesn't play that big of a role. It's not really something that comes up. I live more in light of what I believe, but I don't always have to be bringing it up and discussing it. And the same thing goes with my relationship with my children. Joshua asks, would the world be a better place without religion? Yeah, probably, but that's not the case. Most of the world is religious, and I'll say this: I went through a period when I was a pastor where I was an atheist while I was a pastor, and I read about that in my newest book, The Atheistic Theist: Why There Is No God, You Should Follow Him, also available on Amazon.com. Be sure to check it out. But I went through a period where I was an atheist. I just, I followed Jesus as hard as I could, and I went after God as hard as I could, and it didn't lead me where I thought it was going to lead me. It led me to atheism. Nietzsche in the beginning of The Will to Power, sorry for all the Nietzsche quotes, I've been brushing up on my Nietzsche lately, but in The Will to Power, he says that Christianity will die at the hands of its own morality. And there's a sense in which I experienced that as a truth, and that I followed Jesus as radically as I could, and it didn't lead me deeper into what I thought Christianity to be. It actually led me completely away from it, because the more intensely I followed Jesus, the more that I realized that the system that I thought was the only system worth being a part of didn't really reflect who he was. And so the more I went after him, the more that I lost faith. And I began to, I related much more with the lectures of guys like Richard Dawkins and the late Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and some of these other bigger names. I began to just listen to these guys more than I did sermons, and the things that they were saying made more sense and resonated with me more than what I was hearing on Sunday mornings and on Christian podcasts and things like this. I became an atheist for a season, and And I open my book with the line that it was at the feet of Jesus that I discovered atheism, but then it was at the feet of atheists that I rediscovered Jesus. So through this period of kind of losing and letting go of God and becoming atheist, I actually rediscovered the person of Jesus, and it led me into a more dynamic approach to Christianity, where I found that atheism was not atheistic enough for me because, and this is just me, this is not the experience of everybody, but atheism replaced God in my life. God was the thing that I found my purpose in. I found my, a sense of destiny in God. It was the thing that I lived for. And when I lost that, atheism replaced that. And so I realized that I tried to be an atheist, but I could not, because atheism it filled the place left by the God that I left behind. And we often talk about Nietzsche wrote about the death of God, and we hear that a lot. God is dead, God's not dead. But the truth is, you can't kill gods. You can't kill a God concept. You can't get rid of religion. So, would the world be a better place without religion? I don't think we can get rid of it. And it's certainly not gone right now, and it's certainly not going anywhere. Something like 85% of the population of the world is religious, so it's here. And we have to find ways of using the system of religion as a delivery system to get better ideas to people, because that's the way most people think. They think in religious terms, and it's not. That stuff's hardwired into us. Those archetypes are like burned into us. Thousands and thousands of years of evolution. It doesn't just go away in a generation. It doesn't just go away overnight. So, the whole idea of wanting just to eradicate religion and leave it all behind, it just simply doesn't work, because people just shift. Everything they poured into religion, they'll just pour it into something else, and they'll pursue it with a religious passion and fervor. So you have to use, sometimes like in the Matrix, you have to go inside the Matrix, and you have to learn how to bend the rules a little bit. So you have to work within a religious framework sometimes in order to free people from more toxic forms of religion. The world probably would be a better place without religion, but it is not a place that is without religion, and so we have to learn to use religion to get better ideas to people. So there is that. Trying to get to some more of the questions here. Hope you guys are enjoying this, by the way. I feel like I'm kind of rambling. I'm not used to doing live videos, so pardon me if I am just kind of rambling. While I'm looking for some more questions, I really am hoping to do this kind of thing more. I gave a show me your tattoos. Okay, I only have 3. I have this one up here, which is just kind of a ship and a ship wheel. I have a compass here. I'm eventually going to do this as a whole nautical sleeve, and then I have the triquetra, the symbol for the Trinity here. That's all I got right now. Working on it though. Let's see. Once you said in a message of yours I heard on YouTube, this is Rachel Taylor, that one of the purest forms of worship is to live without a consciousness of sin. Yes, I remember that. I think the quote was, the purest form of worship is to enjoy life in the context of God's presence without a consciousness of sin. Now, when I said that, I still agree with that, by the way, but I said that several years ago when I think I probably said that 5-6 years ago maybe, my view of sin at that point was still more about, I still thought of it more in terms of religion, sin, breaking of the commands or whatever. So I'm speaking specifically in those terms, that the purest form of worship is to live a life in which you're not thinking about those things. That's not what's on your mind. The way that I used to live, honest to God, man, I kid you not, from the time I was probably, 15 until the time I was maybe 25. I think probably I turned 35 on Sunday. So I think it was about 10 years. I I lived with sin in my mind constantly. I kid you not. I would have panic attacks throughout the day. My wife would look over at me and be like, Jeff, are you okay? And I would just be like hyperventilating, like, because I lived just in constant consciousness of sin. And for me, sin wasn't like killing and snorting crack off of whatever. It was everything was sinful to me. It was like if I walked by a piece of paper and I didn't step down to pick it up, I'd get this feeling of, what are you, too big? Are you too much of a big shot? You can't humble yourself and pick that piece of paper up and throw it in the garbage? What that's pride, and God resists the proud. I mean, that's the way that I thought. And it tormented me. And I did not know how to enjoy life. I didn't know how to just look at a sunset and be like, oh, that's so beautiful, because if I did that, I would immediately think, yeah, but those people walking on the boardwalk there, they've never heard of Jesus, and what if they die tonight and their blood is on your hands because you didn't tell them? I could not enjoy a second of my life because I constantly lived just conscious of sin like that. And sorry for talking with my hands so much. And so it was kind of shedding that and getting rid of that and realizing that God does not care about this kind of stuff. I mean, even the things that we in evangelical Christianity and more holiness-oriented circles, the things that we call sin, God, you would have to just throw the Bible into the meat grinder of just... You'd have to completely take it out of context in order to get from it, that the things we call sin today are sin. It's just nonsensical. But I lived like that constantly. I couldn't enjoy life. I couldn't enjoy a moment. I couldn't enjoy my family. I could enjoy nothing. So shedding that and getting rid of that, I began to enjoy life again. I began to enjoy just a meal out with my wife instead of worrying about the salvation of the waiter. I could actually look into my wife's eyes and enjoy a moment with her. Whatever. Insert the situation. I mean, it just changed my ability. I could actually enjoy life when I got rid of it. And so I began to then understand worship to be not the hand raising, hallelujah stuff, which is totally fine, by the way, but as that experience of enjoying the moment that I'm in. And it really dawned on me. I was jogging one night. I used to jog a lot. I should get back into it. But I was jogging one night and I had my earbuds jammed in my ear and I was listening to some worship music, and it was on my iPhone, and all of a sudden the music stopped and I was in prayer, right? I was on the threshold of maybe some dynamic supernatural encounter with God, and all of a sudden the music stopped and it was my wife calling me, being like, you've been gone, I'm guessing, being like, you've been gone an hour, you're gonna be coming home soon. And I pulled the phone out and I saw that it was my wife, and I thought about answering it, and I declined the call, and I put the phone back in my pocket, and I commenced jogging and listening to worship music, and oh, Jesus, you're so good. And that was worship to me. And it was like I ran into just this solid mass, and maybe it was just my imagination, I don't know, but it felt like I just ran into this solid mass, and then I heard, whether it was coming from within, whether it was just in my imagination, or whether it was the Lord speaking to me, I don't know. I just heard this, I had this intense impression. If you do not learn to rid yourself of the idea of distractions or the concept of distractions, you're going to destroy your life and everyone in it. And I realized in that moment that I thought worship was what I was doing when the earbuds were jammed in my ears and I was listening to whatever worship music I was listening to. That was worship to me. And experiencing God was the goosebumps I had down my back as I'm jogging and looking up at the moon and speaking in tongues or whatever. But a real encounter with God lay on the other end of that phone in a conversation with my wife. That's where the real encounter with God was. Real worship would have been for me to have, instead of declining the call, answered it and communed with my wife somehow, even if it's just saying, hey bud, I love you, I'll be home soon. That honest, loving exchange between two people, that's more of an encounter with God than what I was experiencing in the moonlight that night listening to my worship music. And it just dawned on me in that moment, though, that I had worship just so jacked up. To me, worship was just this experience that I have when I'm separated from my family and separated from everyone, and when I'm conscious of all my faults and I'm confessing them and repenting them and whatever, the whole thing. And but the more that I shed that, the more that I learned how to just interact with my family again, and with the world, and just with simple pleasures of life, and I began to enjoy life again, and that came to be worship to me. And the experiences that I had became encounters with God to me. And so anyways, that is that. I apologize, guys, but I'm probably going to have to sign off for now. But thanks for watching tonight. I hope this was somewhat informative or entertaining at the very least. At the very least, I hope you enjoyed my little Batman shrine behind me here. I'm going to be doing this again probably in the next week or so. So if you have questions that you would want me to answer, that you want me to address, feel free to send them to me. I'm going to make a little log of them and maybe go through them. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And by the way, I just wanted to let you know, if you're interested in supporting what we do, if you enjoy this, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/religionless. And you could become a monthly patron. I'm going to begin pouring a lot more time and energy into that site and providing a lot of patrons-only content. I really can't do what I do without that. So if that's something you'd be interested in, check it out. If not, please just enjoy whatever it is that I put up for free. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and we'll talk to you again soon. All right? Peace.